So I cut school a lot. That's, I guess, I didn't mean to tell you that part about myself, but what Liz said, this isn't part of what I'm planning to say, but I think, so my work and the impetus of my work comes from the experience that I had in high school. I grew up in a town called Maplewood, New Jersey, which borders Newark, New Jersey. And I grew up in a blue ribbon high school with whatever the 1996 equivalent of smart chalkboards were, right? With everything that we could have asked for, books and T-shirts and whatever. So I was part of this club called Kids for Kids, and we volunteered in a school, in a sister school in Newark. And I remember walking into that school 1.4 miles away from my own high school and being like, this looks really different. Why can't we share our things with them? Why is this different, right? And that was my first real experience with this sort of random inequity in my high school mind, right, that exists in our education system. And that experience really shaped a lot of my professional choices. So I last came to Big Ideas Fest. I think I counted as one of the young people. I think that's why they invited me. And now I actually have 2 kids of my own, so it's been a while, and I don't think I count as a young person anymore, but I'll let you guys decide. I currently am Director of Impact and Operations for an organization called Born This Way Foundation. It was founded by Lady Gaga and her mom, Cynthia Germanata, so it is Born This Way, like the song. The foundation is committed to supporting the mental wellness of young people in order to build a kinder and braver world. We do this by shining a light on real people, research, and real stories. And I can talk more about that, and I'm happy to. One of the most exciting projects that some of you may have heard of that we just recently completed was the Emotion Revolution. So we, in partnership with the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, first conducted a survey of 44,000 young people to talk about how they currently feel within their schools and how they want to feel. It's no surprise to you guys, people are bored, they're stressed, they feel disrespected, they feel tired. The school environment is not where young people want it to be. And when you think about how they want to feel in their schools, they want to feel respected, they want to feel inspired, they want to feel excited, and more than anything else, they want to feel happy. And so we convened 400 people at Yale University at the end of October to talk about the impact that emotions have on the way young people learn and how we can create environments that help understand and cultivate that. So that's a little bit about what we do at Born This Way, and I'm happy to talk more about it. When I was last here, I was CEO of an organization called Mobilize.org. Mobilize is a national civic engagement organization that empowers millennials to solve problems in their communities. When I left Mobilize, and in the time since I've last been at Big Ideas Fest, I certainly could not have imagined the journey that I would have that would bring me here today, working for the organization that I work for. Lisa asked us just to quickly reflect on a couple things that have changed since our last time, and I think I just want to say I have 3 things that I thought of, but the most important thing that has changed since I was at Big Ideas Fest, and actually because I was at Big Ideas Fest, the week before I came to Big Ideas Fest in Half Moon Bay, I went to a funder convening, a really big funder. There were 600 people there, and they called me 48 hours before the convening, and they were like, do you know any young people? And I was like, well, you fund us out of your Youth Voice portfolio, so yeah, no, I do. I know young people. And they're like, great, can you bring me some? I was like, sure, I'll bring you some young people for your grantee convening. And so we walk into a room of 600 young people, me and my posse of young people, and there's a table in the back of the room with a table tent that, no joke, people, says youth, right? So just one table, back of the room for my friends that says youth. And my colleague and I were like, this is not how that's going to work, right? So we moved some chairs and had our young people sitting at a number of the other tables, and that was a jarring experience both for the young people who weren't properly welcomed in the room and the funders who unexpectedly had to sit next to a young person at dinner, which how dare we put a young person next to them, though they're funding youth issues. So that experience had us change the focus of our grant to be around youth voice. So instead of talking about young people, we would use our access as leaders of an organization to empower youth voices to be heard. So Big Ideas Fest was the first time where we put into practice the money that we had received to bring young people with us. So every time that I spoke, starting at Big Ideas Fest, we didn't talk about the stories of young people. We brought young people to sit alongside us and have their voices heard. And I remember it was at the Ritz in Half Moon Bay, which is a beautiful place, and we should look at that again. My husband will come. And I remember getting a frantic call from one of our young people who didn't know how to open the door, right? So for me, going to Half Moon Bay was just another speaking engagement at another conference at another hotel. For this young woman who was formerly homeless out of Charlotte, North Carolina, she was given a black key and a door where she didn't know where this black key went to. It was the first time she had stayed in a hotel, the first time she had been on a plane, and I had no idea how we were blowing her mind by this opportunity. So she was super stressed out, standing in front of her hotel door, telling me that she was either at the wrong door or that her key didn't work because she didn't know how to put it in, right? And so in that moment, I understood the gravity and the responsibility that we all have to support youth voice, and that's the most important thing that's changed for me personally, professionally, and the lesson that I most want to leave with you guys. And I am so grateful to Lisa for being the testing ground for that, and for inviting Emily and her friend from Charlotte to participate in Big Ideas Fest. So one other thing I'll just say, I'm sorry to take longer than time. So I got trained in mental health first aid yesterday, which is an amazing program. We should totally learn about it. But I found that the single biggest, most proactive, protective factor in a young person's mental health is their connection to an adult, to one other person who they know cares about them. And that, I'll just leave it at that. I had no idea the role that we were playing in young people in terms of protecting their mental health and keeping them alive. So youth voice, authentic relationship with young people, and I could go home right now because that's all I want to tell you guys.
Hi, I'm Erin. I just want to reiterate that the kid I stabbed did survive my violent assault. I broke the tip off my pencil, though. So I run WordNik, which is the biggest and least known dictionary of English in the world. We have 10 times as many words as the next biggest English dictionary, which would be the Oxford English Dictionary. And our mission is to make every word of English look upable. We want to collect all the words, and we want to share them with everyone, everywhere. We recently became a nonprofit. Last year, we originally were a venture-backed startup, and when I was here in 2010, we had just launched. We had been up for less than a year. We were seeing great use of the site. People were coming, they were enjoying a different picture, a 360-degree view of what an English word is like. Because at WordNik, we include every word by counterintuitively not writing definitions for every word. Most of the words you learned in your life, you never read a dictionary definition for those words. You wouldn't have time to have the vocabularies that you do if you had stopped to read a dictionary definition for every word you know. You learned most of the words in your vocabulary by seeing them in real example sentences. You read them in a newspaper article, a magazine article, a book. You heard someone use the word to you, with you, for you, and you learned the way most people do, by example. So we try to find good, live, excellent model sentences for every word in English. And we're especially looking for sentences that we call free-range definitions. So especially if you're reading about scientific or technical topics, the journalist usually writing those articles can't assume that you know all of these technical words. So they try to define them in context. And journalists also try to define more slangy words as well, because not everyone can be part of every culture that has slang. And I find these sentences all the time. I found this one the other day. Let's see. In fact, this morning I saw the word philanthrocapitalism. Does anyone know who that was in reference to? Zuckerberg, yeah. These words happen all the time. Like these free-range definitions, they sound like this. While making a drastic change in appearance after a breakup isn't uncommon for women, it is sometimes referred to as a breakover. It seems that more men have been embracing this idea. This was in a story in the New York Times about one of the Jonas brothers dyeing his hair blue because he broke up with somebody. So yeah, words like breakover are not going to be in traditional dictionaries, but they're words of English, and they should be able to be looked up. And one of the reasons that we think that every word should be look-upable is because curiosity is a precious resource. And it's also a resource that, it's like an aquifer, right? You have an aquifer of curiosity, and every time you're curious about something, you spend a little bit of that curiosity. And if your curiosity is satisfied, you refresh your reservoir of curiosity. But if somebody says, oh, what you're interested in isn't important, it's stupid, it's not real, then that resource is wasted. And the next time that you want to ask a question, the next time that you're curious about something, you're like, oh, well, last time I asked a question, somebody told me I was stupid. Last time I asked a question, I got a blank page. Last time I asked a question, I was told that the thing I was curious about wasn't even real, then you're not going to do it again. And the English language is huge, and it's beautiful, and it's full of amazing words that we should celebrate. Like, one of the words I like to tell people about that few people know is the word petrichor. Do people know this word? Petrichor is that beautiful chemical smell that happens after a rain on a hot day. You've probably all experienced that, right? But did you know there was a word for it? Naming things, being able to name things, gives you a power. A word is a handle for an idea that lets you pick up that idea and carry it around with you. We heard a beautiful phrase earlier today that people don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care. That's actually a rhetorical figure of speech called a chiasmus. And there's other examples like never let a kiss fool you or a fool kiss you. The same inversion. Now you know what that's called, you're much more likely to recognize that rhetorical device next time you hear it. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That's another chiasmus. And people are creating new, interesting words all the time. The one that came about, I heard just the other day, snunkkoopel. Anybody heard the word snunkkoopel? Everybody laughed, right? It's a hilarious word. It's actually a word that means a word that sounds funny, even though it's not a word. And some researchers in Alberta, they were trying to research what makes a word sound funny, and so they were like, well, we need a word for what a funny sounding word is. It's harder to say, I think, than it ought to be, snunkkoopel. But since I was here last, when I was here in 2010, we just started, and we were figuring out the what. What are we going to do? We knew we wanted to make the biggest dictionary in the world. We wanted to map the whole English language. We wanted to share data about words with everyone who was interested in it. But we were still figuring out the how. What was the right business model for what we were going to do? We actually reincorporated as a nonprofit because a venture-backed business model wasn't the right business model. Were we only going to be on the web? Well, we realized we were collecting so much data, and we wanted to share it even more widely, that we created an API. And now there are 16,000 software developers who have keys to our API, and they're making study apps and word games and ways to cheat at Words with Friends and all sorts of stuff. And but I think the best thing that I heard last time I was here was just how I think words are great. I love words. I could talk about words all day. And I felt like every person I talked to here had a word that they wanted to tell me about, a word that they'd loved their whole lives, and they wanted it to be in the dictionary. And I could tell every single person, yes, that word should be in the dictionary.
That's very cool. Does that mean look-upable is a word?
Of course it's a word.
Okay, good. I'm going to use that.
That's my stock answer.
I feel validated. I feel validated. No one can accuse me of having bad English, because I'll say, no, that's a word, and I just invented it. I guess it's hard to say what I do and why I do without talking about where and how I grew up. So I grew up in Pakistan and went to school in Pakistan and was born to parents from very humble origins, into a very, very traditional family. And my parents didn't get to have a lot of opportunity growing up, but really worked hard to make sure that my siblings and I went to the best schools around, no matter what it cost them, no matter what they had to do to get us there. And so I grew up in Pakistan. I had a loving home. I had a good education, relatively. But I was also growing up in a country that is the second highest, that has the second highest number of children out of school. It was also a country where there is severe poverty, and at the time when I was growing up, had rising violence, rising terrorism, and it's also a country that's consistently ranked one of the worst places to be born a woman. And I was acutely aware that something outside was broken from a young age. I think all of us, when we look at our communities, if we just look a little bit harder, we see how much is broken. But somehow I recognized that early and was able to go in, volunteer in prisons, relief camps, refugee camps, and really learn what it meant to mobilize a community, what it meant to organize grassroots programs, what it meant to try and tackle poverty through entrepreneurship, and what it meant to advocate at a government level to change policy. And that was sort of the reason I was skipping school in my defense. There was so much outside that I wanted to fix from an early age. And when I was 18, I got a scholarship to Stanford, so I moved here to America for the very first time, wide-eyed and passionate, but stayed very passionate about home and helping people back home. One of the little girls that I was mentoring back home was a little girl called Malala. You've all heard about Malala now. She's the youngest ever Nobel Peace Prize winner. But at the time, she was an 11-year-old girl, and her dad were fighting to keep their school open. They came from a remote part of Pakistan called the Swat Valley, very different from where I grew up. Education there was being targeted through terrorism. It wasn't being targeted in my part of the country, which I point out just because people are always confused about why her education was threatened and yet I was able to get mine. She came from a very remote part of the country with a lot of violence. And what I was trying to do then was really, Lisa, what you're trying to do, tell stories that matter. People in the capital, people with power, didn't care about what was happening in this remote town where girls were no longer able to go to school because of violence. So after I graduated from college, I was honestly a little frustrated by the nonprofit space, and I said, I'm going to go learn from the business world, and I joined the top business consulting firm. I moved to the Middle East, and I started working in Egypt and Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and learning how to create business strategy at scale. And about a year into that work, Malala, the little girl I had mentored, was shot. She was attacked in a targeted shooting for speaking out about girls' education and speaking out against the Taliban. And it was at that moment that her father called me up, and I went in and saw the opportunity to work with them and create a movement. At the time, it was a day in breaking news. It was a story of tragedy, but we wanted to create it into a story of hope, a story that inspired millions around the world to believe in the potential of girls and to recognize the importance of educating young girls. So I ended up leaving my job, jumping into something I didn't know what it would be then, but it ended up being a storytelling movement. So we got 2 books out, we got a movie out that just was released recently, telling the story of girls' education through Malala's personal story. And then we built what we called the Malala Fund. And that was really to activate against that story, to say, okay, people are paying attention. What do we want to ask them to do? And we did 2 things. One, we advocated at a government level to push governments to guarantee 12 years of free, high-quality education to all girls everywhere. And then we also engaged in grant making. We would find organizations that we thought were promising, working on secondary schooling for girls, and support them on the ground to get their projects up and running. So that's what I did for about 2 years, and I actually came to Big Ideas Fest. Very early into that journey, I had sort of moved to the US with one suitcase filled with clothes. I was living, between several cities, living being a generous word, trying to figure out how to get this nonprofit started, how to build a strategy, how to hire great people, how to get funded. And Lisa and Mariam invited me to come to Big Ideas Fest so that I could benefit from this incredible community of thinkers and entrepreneurs and innovators. And I was honored with an award at the ceremony as well, which was really powerful for me because I'm a quiet person, and I'm a shy person, and I was particularly quiet and shy then. I was 23. And so, putting me on stage and enabling me to tell my story allowed me to then connect with people and reach out to them, and people would come up to me and offer support since they had seen that story and were able to connect with that story. So that's how I was first introduced to Big Ideas Fest. And since then, a lot has changed. Most notably, Malala was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize last year. Thank you. When I first met my fiance, he asked me, I think on our first date, he said, what you're doing now, when will you feel like you have enough momentum to move on to the next thing? And I said, well, if I do my job right, maybe Malala will win the Nobel Peace Prize in 20 years. And then she did, but much earlier than expected. And so I decided, okay, Malala's story and the Malala Fund are growing and doing well. But the thing with education is, it is difficult. It is difficult to figure out, how do we get education to the hardest to reach parts of the world? And then how do we transform education so that we're actually inspiring young people to be empathetic and creative and self-confident and to create change that matters? And so I believe we have to run a ton of experiments in this space, and we have to support a lot of innovators and spur entrepreneurship and test it on the ground. And so now I'm very focused on trying to bring more philanthropic and investment capital to entrepreneurs and innovators globally, and telling more stories on TV and in person about great entrepreneurs, the other Malalas out there, whose ideas aren't being heard today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think you can see when we talk about the BIF bump and transforming the future of learning and education in people's lives, that these are just three, exemplary people who have been doing that before they came to Big Ideas Fest, after they came, but that there's really been, such a cohesiveness of the kinds of ideas and networking. I mean, how many people here have already gotten cards and business cards from people or written down ideas? Just a quick show of hands. You've only been here, you've only been here a short amount of time, and this has already transpired. So this inspires us actually as well. But the question I want to ask, I have several questions, but one is, there's, for all of what you've done for various reasons, there's always been this certain amount of risk that you've had to take. And it would be great to just hear a little bit about sort of how you approach risk, or in the work that you've described, and so has it been useful to you, in terms of how you've helped move this whole innovation landscape here? Who wants to go first?
I can go first. So I think, and even more so as a parent now, I think about the importance of modeling failure and modeling, trying something, and you're allowed to not like it, right? Like, I'm literally thinking about my dinner table conversation last night with my son Hunter. You can't say you don't like the peas without trying the peas. Once you've tried the pea, you can say you don't like the pea, and you never have to eat the pea again, but you have to try it, right? And it's only through the trying of it. So it's funny because we're celebrated and measured on our successes instead of the iterative process of getting there. And so I think in the universes that I've been able to control, I've tried to create ways to celebrate and measure risk and really have open and honest conversations around it. So I think it's an essential part of entrepreneurship, of success in nonprofits, of changing the education landscape, but there is a tremendous amount of privilege that comes in the ability to take a risk, right? So if the nonprofit that I was leading went under and we couldn't make payroll, my parents' couch was there for me until I figured out my next thing, right? My education would have allowed me a wide range of opportunities. And so I think you can't really divorce the idea of risk and the ability to take it with the privilege of being caught if you fail. And so how do we, I don't have the answer to that, but I think that celebrating and talking about risk and the need for it is one place to start.
Does anybody else want to answer that one? Or we'll go on.
I feel like it sounds a little funny to talk about risk and making dictionaries. I mean, no one's going to shoot me in the head if I leave a word out. But I think that I try to talk to people about the risk of not doing something, the risk of keeping things the same. It's comfortable to keep things the same, and you don't have to worry as much when you keep things the same. But are you really going to be happy at the end of the day? Are you really doing everything that you can if you don't try to make the change that you want to see happen? And I feel very lucky because every day it gets technologically easier to make the things I want to make. I used to be the editor-in-chief of American Dictionaries for Oxford University Press. It took like several dozen people to make a print dictionary, and that was just inside the press. When I first started WordNick, we needed 5 to 6 people just to start. Today, I'm a full-stack engineer by default. I can write, I go and restart the servers, I write the front-end code. Amazon releases something new every day that means I can do more with less. And the risk is not taking advantage of these opportunities. The risk is saying, what if I screw up? You know what? I screw up, maybe things go out of alphabetical order for 10 minutes. Risk is not that big a deal for me, because I'm lucky.
Sure. I mean, I think Maya and Erin spoke more eloquently than I'll be able to on this, but there's really 2 types of risks, right? There's personal risk. Can I go in? Can I afford to not go to grad school and get that entry-level job that leads to me being able to climb the career ladder? And Maya's absolutely right. There's a certain privilege to be able to say, no, I'm going to follow my dreams. But I also think we don't talk enough about the risk of to your point, going into some of these career paths that you don't love, that are considered traditionally safe, whether it's health. I mean, you look at investment banking or consulting, and you look at the health of people who've been in those careers. And I say this as someone who was in consulting, and there is massive heart disease and stress and anxiety that you see in these professions. So there's a tremendous, and you look at sort of, you hear the success stories of people who made it, but in these industries, people lose jobs and get fired instantly. And I've never, I was in a consulting firm, the top hirer for Stanford graduates. It was the job that everyone wanted. And I left terrified. I had no savings. I didn't have a work visa to the United States. And today, being self-employed, I feel safer than I ever have, because I know finally that, well, A, I'm happy and I'm not sick and anxious. And B, I know that no matter what happens, I can figure it out. I can figure out a way to make, to create value in this world, and the type of value that someone will pay for, and also the type of value that will make me want to get out of bed every day. So I think we don't talk enough about the risks in so-called safe professions as well. And then there's risk in taking risks within your organization. And there I'll just say, nonprofits don't do it enough. When you look at the number of startups that fail, it is extremely high. startups in the for-profit space, when you look at the number of nonprofits that fail, that rarely happens because they're sort of kept in business by subsidizing whatever model they've come up with through donations, and they're not really held accountable to, are you succeeding or are you failing? And so I think, the other point I'd like to add on is we need to push ourselves who are in the nonprofit space to take risks, to be willing to shut down, to be willing to put ourselves out of business if we fail, or sometimes you have a model where if you succeed, it's time to go out of business because you've solved it. And so bringing about a conversation about the need to take risk in the nonprofit space is instrumental to solving some of the issues we're seeing today.
And of course, as running a nonprofit, as I'm sure many of you are also engaged in nonprofits, that certainly is an issue that we think about in terms of how we took a risk just to start the very first Big Ideas Fest. Aside from ISKME staff, was there anybody here in 2009 at Big Ideas Fest? Is anybody here from that early? 2009, all right, in the back? Like that was a big risk to just take because we took it without knowing if anybody would show up, if the model would work, if people would actually come here and embrace design thinking as a way to think about innovation. And so, I had a board of directors that said, why exactly are you doing this? Why, do you plan conferences now? And we said, no, this is about our pedagogy. This is about the work. This is about bringing communities of people together across the whole spectrum of education. And so I just really want to echo some of what I've heard about the personal and the professional. And again, that's why we've come over this whole 7 years in this way, looking now and saying, what's our next big, risk? What's the next big change that we'll take with Big Ideas Fest? I think I heard Hawaii yesterday, but it's not just about location. So given that, I would love to just ask, a final question, which is, if we were to plot this out, now this goes out to 2015, so if we go out to 2020, I guess maybe just tell us a little bit about the next risk you're going to take, or the next move you're going to make. What will this look like? Tell us from your perspective, and or from the perspective of what you think we'll be seeing then in your work.
Sure. Did we say 2015?
2020.
2020.
Where's the landscape for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I like to say I'm out there looking for the next Malalas. And to me, that doesn't mean everyone has to win a Nobel Peace Prize or have best-selling books and films, because stories will resonate more than others. But I think it does mean finding the innovators who are taking tremendous risk, working against all obstacles in parts of the world that are hard to reach, and don't have ecosystems like the ones that exist in Silicon Valley. Finding those innovators and supporting them through resources, so investment, both philanthropic and financial, mentorship, which is critical to help young entrepreneurs succeed, and visibility, the type of press that they need and the types of circles that they need to access to make their ideas real and to make their ideas legitimate. So that's sort of what I'm out there doing now, and that has many, many components. One is effective storytelling, and I'm exploring various storytelling platforms that would provide the space for entrepreneurs with big ideas to be covered and represented and uplifted. The other is sort of financing, and so philanthropic capital has a role, but I think traditionally philanthropy was intended to take risks that the market wouldn't, because people were willing to give away that money. So it should have been taking the types of risks that investors weren't willing to take because they wanted to make money. And so pushing philanthropy to do that again, to go into support the types of entrepreneurs who don't have a finished product yet, but are researching solutions to some of the hardest to solve diseases, or creating products that can transform the game, but the development cycle is going to take a while. So how do we get philanthropy to do that? And on the other side, how do we get investors to stop investing in 50 photo sharing apps and really try and look for interesting entrepreneurs taking on challenging problems? And maybe they'll make slightly lower returns, But I really believe the best models actually do generate revenue. We just need to look harder for them. And the last part of it is sort of mentorship and networking and support. And a lot of entrepreneurs globally working in the impact space don't have the language to express what they're even doing. I never heard the word entrepreneur growing up. There wasn't a word for it in Urdu, the language that we spoke. I never had a role model to look up to and think, well, if she can do it, so can I. And I didn't really have mentors who taught me how to raise capital or how to build digital campaigns. And I think there's a lot of incredible people who want to support but don't know how. And so bringing that mentorship to great entrepreneurs on the ground. And hopefully in 5 years, we'll have 10 other incredible Malalas really creating a big impact around the world.
Thank you. Erin?
I'd hope by 2020 we're not still arguing about whether something is a word, is this a good word or not, but instead asking the question, what's this word good for? Just stop thinking, oh, is it a word, but instead start asking ourselves more qualitative questions like, does this word express what I need to express? Is this word going to be harmful to someone? Is it going to stop the conversation instead of start the conversation? Is this word clear, logical, expressive, beautiful, funny, instead of just trying to look it up in a list and seeing if it's there? And it would be nice to have new arguments about words, because I'm getting tired of the old ones. Maybe by 2020. I mean, people have been having the is this a word argument since Samuel Johnson. So we've got 400 years of this behind us. I think we could, wrap it up in 5 years.
So do you hate Scrabble?
I'm terrible at Scrabble.
Okay.
It's too much math.
So for me, this year, and I'm sure many of you know this better than I do, but this year, the stress of young people for the first time outpaced the stress levels among the adult population, right? So young people are facing some serious challenges. 1 out of every 5 young people have a mental disorder severe enough to interfere with their ability to function and thrive. So one of the big pieces of work that's really important to me is to address the stigma around mental wellness and help seeking options. So that's something that I hope really changes within educational institutions in our society broadly. I think, as a mom, as a private citizen, as just a community member, I think current events also would have us thinking about the world that we want our young people, our children, to inherit. And that's one of the biggest driving factors for me in all of the work that we do. So our mission of building a kind and brave world is a beautiful talking point, but also something for those of us who work with, live with, interact with young people every day, like an urgent call. And so I hope that I'm able to define that, measure that, report on it, and then shine a light on examples of young people, organizations, and systems that are doing that.
Great, thank you.